Now, Chinese officials have been giving the latest figures regarding the deadly coronavirus. More than 1,300 people have now known to have died from the virus, with nearly 64,000 cases reported. Infections of the new coronavirus have now been detected in 24 countries outside China. We know that health authorities here at home have laid plans to manage any eventuality. With no cases reported so far in South Africa, a big question is, should businesses be preparing for the possibility that this might happen in their workplace? Well, to help us explore this, I'm now joined by a Risk Intelligence Committee member at the Institute of Risk Management of South Africa, IRMSA, Walter Ehrlich. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, Peter. Thank you.
All right, so, normally with these kinds of cases, we leave everything to the health authorities. They come up with their contingencies and their plans. And sometimes as businesses, we don't think that maybe we should also have a plan. Why is it important to not be complacent and to think of a plan for coronavirus at work?
Well, I think the first thing is we need to recognize that there is a risk in our business.
Right.
It can play out in various ways in various businesses. If you imagine someone comes back from a trip to China, or even passes through the same hub as somebody else and brings the virus back into the workplace, that could play out in a different way if someone works in a contact center than if they work in an open air environment. So the first thing organizations need to do is recognize there is a risk, and how would it play out if it was brought into their workplace.
All right. So what then happens? What do you do once you recognize there could be a problem? What does a risk manager or someone who's been assigned the assessment of risk do?
So risk management by its nature is actually proactive. It's not a reactive discipline.
Yeah.
So risk managers are trained to be able to advise business, to recognize uncertainties, to recognize uncertain events or risks, and then to assess what the impact would be if they occurred. So we know this has occurred in China, we know it could occur here. So business would need to get prepared, first of all, by having a preparedness plan or a continuity of operations plan, and that would set out in detail what the triggers would be that would trigger certain actions.
Right.
So that's on the reactive side, but there is also a preventative side.
Tell us about the preventative measures that one might take.
Yeah. So where we are at the moment, we're not in the flu season yet in South Africa. So certainly it would be good for everyone to have a flu jab this year, especially those who maybe have compromised immune systems, and their business has to work hand in hand with government to make sure that there is sufficient vaccine available to meet everybody. I think corporate should really have in-house campaigns to make it accessible for people to be vaccinated, and the reason for that is not because that vaccination would protect you from the coronavirus, but it would protect you from the normal flu virus, so that if you show symptoms, medical teams can then exclude the normal flu and start to treat you or recognize you as a risk and perhaps ask you not to come to the workplace.
Might it be useful to have a special coronavirus group in the company that focuses specifically on that threat?
Yes, certainly. Many years back we had the avian flu scare, the H1N1, and that's exactly what companies did. They put up written plans, and they knew exactly who the doctors, who the specialists were that they would call, and the same has to be done here with this virus, so that people know what the symptoms are, and they need to put up communication notices that people are washing their hands regularly, that you have that information available to staff, and also know what to do if they are not feeling well. We don't want to encourage absenteeism, but there are ways in which companies can put things into place. So a preparedness plan is really what is needed.
And one of the things about someone getting the virus is now starting to track where everybody is who's come into contact. And I suppose having information about who is at work, who was at work, where they live, that becomes part of a critical part of that plan.
Yes, certainly. I mean, you would want to know where the root origin was, where it actually came from. So it would probably be a good thing for a corporate to say that, let's say during flu season now, which starts from May, if you've been overseas and you come back and you're not feeling well, go and see the company doctor. If there have been outbreaks nearer to our region, maybe say, first go and see a doctor before you come to work, that they can just do an initial screening. There are things being developed now. In fact, you would have heard yesterday there was an upsurge in China in the reported figures, and that was just because they were now reporting on a clinical diagnosis and not only what had come through the lab. So that would be good. It's a screening. It's a sort of an X-ray screening of the chest, so it would be good to just put some of those rules into place, because at the end of the day, business leaders are stewards of the people entrusted to them, and they have to do something not to protect only the business, but the people that the business depends on.
You know, when you hear the word risk manager, you often hear it in the context of financial services and also bigger corporations. But I would imagine that a guy who owns a small factory also needs to be having some knowledge of risk management.
Yes.
Is there a place for the smaller business person to educate themselves about risk management?
So certainly the Institute of Risk Management, or IRMSA, is the professional body in South Africa that trains and certifies risk managers. I do some training for IRMSA myself, and there are people that really come from large businesses, private sector, public sector, but also smaller businesses that just really want to become competent in being able to identify the uncertainties which, if they occurred, could have an impact on their business, and they want to avoid that. So they want to know how to treat that risk, and risk management is not rocket science, but it does require time and a certain amount of discipline.
And it goes beyond just fires and incidents at work, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
What sort of other areas of risk should we be thinking about that we sometimes don't pay attention to?
Look, there are risks in our external environment. So there are risks of what happened yesterday in Sona. Is that going to have a favorable impact on the economy? Are investors going to invest into my business or not? So there are all of those external risks. Then we have the internal risks in an organization, in our business processes, in our business model. We have risks in relation to compliance or non-compliance with legislation. If you're a mine, you have many compliance risks. If you're a bank, you have many compliance risks. So risk is really present in everything, but there is opportunity present in risk as well. And that is what risk managers are also there to use, the same processes to identify the uncertainties, which if they occurred could have a positive impact on the outcomes of the business. So the risk is really about managing uncertainty and about acting on what you know then. You can't act on every risk, so the discipline involves how to prioritize and evaluate risk.
Walter, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks very much indeed. And let's hope that businesses out there who are watching have a risk plan in place, and in fact, just as a discipline, to have someone constantly looking at some of these uncertainties and coming up with a plan. And coronavirus certainly is one of those, and don't just leave it to the health authorities. Have a plan at work as well. If it breaks out, what will you do?